I received a phone call a while back from a friend that I hadn't heard from in a long time, and so I was very excited to hear his voice. I picked up the phone and said, "How you doing?" "Okay," he said, but in a way that made it pretty clear that he wasn't, and it didn't take long for him to tell me why. It was because he had lost something. "I've lost my faith," he said. "I don't believe in Jesus anymore." He grew up believing in Jesus. He taught his kids about Jesus. His kids still believe in Jesus and go to church, and he's glad for that, but he just said that he doesn't believe anymore. He doesn't have faith. You ever worry that the same thing might one day happen to you? Do you ever worry about losing your faith? That happened for my friend shortly after there had been some major flooding in the state of Texas. And he said that it was really painful. He watched all these news stories about people dying, including little children, and he just wondered why a loving God would ever allow something like that to happen. And I'd been paying attention to the news, and I had seen many of the same stories, and there were some pretty tragic ones. For example, there was a story about a mom named Colette who was driving her 3-year-old daughter in their truck through the floodwaters trying to get to safety, but eventually the waters were too high and she couldn't drive any longer, and the waters continued to rise, and so she knew she had to get out of her truck, and so she grabbed her 3-year-old daughter. They exited the truck, but as soon as they did, the powerful currents swept them away, and Colette struggled to keep both her head and the head of her daughter above the water, and she couldn't do both. As they flew down the rapids, eventually a rescue team that was in a boat, they saw them coming, and they were able to pull both of them into their rescue boat just before they would have disappeared underneath a bridge. When they landed in the boat, the 3-year-old was cold but alive. Colette was unresponsive. The 3-year-old lived, but Colette died. She died saving her daughter's life. Now, I know that when we hear stories like that, it can fill our minds with all sorts of questions. Questions about God, questions about when and why he acts, and when and why he doesn't. And I wish I knew an answer to every last one of them. I don't. I do, however, know this: that when God looked down from heaven and saw us struggling, he didn't stay away. He put on human skin, dove right into the rapids, and eventually climbed across where he was assaulted by the high waters of hell that we can't even imagine, all while holding our fragile souls that are so troubled by life and troubled by sin above the water so that we could breathe in the reality of being forgiven, of anything that might ever separate us from him, and the reality of knowing that one day we will taste the best of heaven with our own palate. And not because our faith is so great, but because that's exactly what Jesus promises will happen. In John chapter 10, Jesus said this about his disciples. He said, "I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one can snatch them out of my hand." Maybe our grip on him is sometimes pretty weak, but his grip on us, it isn't.